Oh, nobody can hear. I've been reading on mute the whole time. My apologies. My apologies. You know, I've been reading on mute the whole time. I've been reading on mute like for those who've just joined us, my apologies. I'm on and I've been reading for the last almost 30 minutes. Nobody can hear. I've been reading on mute the whole time. Okay. Thank you for the call. My apologies. You know, I've been reading on mute. Okay. All right. Now I'm getting the messages. So, you know, I'm going to have to back up and come again. I'm getting a lot of messages. I can't hear anything. And I'm just reading along and reading along and reading along. Okay, sorry. I'm wondering if I've been reading on mute the whole time. Apparently I have. I really got to check that mute button. All right. Okay, for those who just joined me, I was reading to myself, but that's all good because I enjoy reading to myself. But I want to read to everybody else, so we're going to have to start from the top. We was all juiced up in this thing now. That's life sometimes. We get little false starts, but now I can be heard. And my apologies. So I'm going to take it from the top. And I was at the end of the chapter. It's all good. The slave who dared to feel like a man. 2 years had passed since I entered Dr. Flint's family, and those years had brought much of the knowledge that comes from experience, though they had afforded little opportunity for any other kind of knowledge. My grandmother had as much as possible been a mother to her orphan grandchildren. By perseverance and unwearied industry, she was now mistress of a snug little home, surrounded with the necessaries of life. If those have just joined us, grandmother had bought or had gotten her freedom. She was emancipated in the last chapter or the last chapter before. She would have been happy could her children have shared them with her. There remained but 3 children and 2 grandchildren, all slaves. Most earnestly did strive to make us feel that it was the will of God, that he had seen fit to place us under such circumstances, and though it seemed hard, we ought to pray from contentment. It was a beautiful faith coming from a mother who could not call her children her own. But I and Benjamin, her youngest boy, condemned it. We reasoned that it was much more the will of God that we should be situated as she was. We longed for a home like hers. There we always found sweet balsam for our troubles. She was so loving, so sympathizing. She always met us with a smile and listened with patience to all our sorrows. She spoke so hopefully that unconsciously the clouds gave place to sunshine. There was a grand big oven there too, that baked bread and nice things for the town. And we knew there was always a choice bit in store for us. But alas, even the charms of the old oven failed to reconcile us to our hard lot. Benjamin was now a tall and handsome lad, strong and gracefully made, and with a spirit too bold and daring for a slave. Give me 1 second. Let me update those who may have been concerned that this, sorry. 1 second, my apologies. Whee! Okay. Okay. My bad. All right. But alas, even the charms of the old oven failed to reconcile us to our hard lot. Oh, I read that already. Benjamin was now a tall, handsome lad and strongly and gracefully made, and with a spirit too bold and daring for a slave. My brother William, now 12 years old, had the same aversion to the word master that he had when he was an urchin of 7 years. I was his confidant. He came to me with all his troubles. I remember one instance in particular. It was on a lovely spring morning, and when I marked the sunlight dancing here and there, Its beauty seemed to mock my sadness, for my master, whose restless craving and vicious nature roved about day and night, seeking whom to devour, had just left me with stinging, scorching words, words that scathed ear and brain like fire. Oh, how I despised him. I thought how glad I should be if some day when he walked the earth, it would open and swallow him up and disencumber the world of a plague. When he told me that I was made for his use, made to obey his command in everything, I was nothing but a slave whose will must and should surrender to his. Never before had my puny arm felt half so strong. So deeply was I absorbed in painful reflections afterwards that I neither saw nor heard the entrance of anyone, till the voice of William sounded close beside me. Linda, said he, what makes you look so sad? I love you. Oh, Linda, isn't this a bad world? Everybody seems so cross and unhappy. I wish, her brother says, that he had died when poor father did. I told him that everybody was not cross or unhappy, that those who had pleasant homes and kind friends and who were not afraid to love them were happy. But we who were slave children without father or mother could not expect to be happy. We must be good. Perhaps that would bring us contentment. Yes, he said, I'm trying to be good, but what's the use? They are all the time troubling me. Then he proceeded to relate his afternoon difficulty with young Master Nicholas. It seemed that the brother of Master Nicholas had pleased himself with making up stories about William. Master Nicholas said he should be flogged, and he would do it, whereupon he went to work. But William fought bravely, and the young master, finding he was getting the better of him, undertook to tie his hands behind his back. He failed in that likewise, by dint of kicking and fisting. William came out of the skirmish none the worse for a few scratches. He continued to discourse on his young master's meanness, how he between him and meanness, how he whipped the little boys, but was a perfect coward when a tussle ensued between him and white boys of his own size. One such occasion, he always took to his legs. On such occasion, he always took to his legs. William had other charges to make against him. One was rubbing up pennies with quicksilver and passing them off for quarters of a dollar on an old man who kept a fruit stall. William was often sent to buy fruit, and he earnestly inquired of me what he ought to do under such circumstances. I told him it was certainly wrong to deceive the old man, and that it was his duty to tell him of the impositions practiced by his young master. I assured him the old man would not be slow to comprehend the whole, and there the matter would end. William thought it might with the old man, but not with him. He said he did not mind the smart of the whip, but he did not like the idea of being whipped. While I advised him to be good and forgiving, I was not unconscious of the beam in my own eye. It was the very knowledge of my own shortcomings that urged me to retain, if possible, some sparks of my brother's God-given nature. I had not lived 14 years in slavery for nothing. I had felt, seen, and heard enough to read the characters and question the motives of those around me. The war of my life had begun, and though one of God's most powerless creatures, I resolved never to be conquered, alas, for me. If there was one pure, sunny spot for me, I believed it to be in Benjamin's heart, and in another whom I loved with all the ardor of a girl's first love. My owner knew of it and sought in every way to render me miserable. He did not resort to corporal punishment, but to all the petty, tyrannical ways that human ingenuity could devise. I remember the first time I was punished. It was in the month of February. My grandmother had taken my old shoes and replaced them with a new pair. I needed them, for several inches of snow had fallen, and it still continued to fall. When I walked through Mrs. Flint's room, their creaking grated harshly on her refined nerves. She called me to her and asked what I had about me that made such a horrid noise. I told her it was my new shoes. Take them off, she, and if you put them on again, I'll throw them in the fire. I took them off and my stockings also. She then sent me on a long distance on an errand. As I went through the snow, my bare feet tingled. That night I was very hoarse and I went to bed thinking the next day would find me sick, perhaps dead. What was my grief on waking to find myself quite well. I had imagined if I died or was laid up for some time that my mistress would feel a twinge of remorse that she had so hated the little imp, as she styled me. It was my ignorance of that mistress that gave rise to such extravagant imaginings. And that word imp, by the way, I was reading another narrative and that seemed like something they like to talk or call people, and it's not a nice word as you can imagine. Dr. Flint occasionally had high prices offered for me, but he always said, she doesn't belong to me. She is my daughter's property, and I have no right to sell her. Good, honest man. My young mistress was still a child, and I could look for no protection from her. I loved her, and she returned my affection. I once heard her father allude to her attachment to me, and his wife promptly replied that it proceeded from fear. This put unpleasant doubts in my mind. Did the child feel what she did not feel, or was her mother jealous of the might of love she bestowed on me? I concluded it must be the latter. I said to myself, surely little children are true. One afternoon, I sat at my sewing, feeling unusual depression of spirit. My mistress had been accusing me of an offense of which I assured her I was perfectly innocent. 1 second. But by the contemptuous curl of her lip that she believed I was telling a lie. I wondered for what wise purpose was God leading me through such thorny paths, and whether still darker days were in store for me. As I sat musing thus, the door opened softly and William came in. Well, brother, said I, what is the matter this time? Oh, Linda, Ben and his master have had a dreadful time, said he. My first thought was that Benjamin was killed. Don't be frightened, Linda, said William. I will tell you all about it. It appeared that Benjamin's master had sent for him, and he did not immediately obey the summons. When he did, his master was angry and began to whip him. He resisted. Master and slave fought, and finally the master was thrown. Benjamin had cause to tremble, for he had thrown to the ground his master, one of the richest men in town. I anxiously awaited the result. That night I stole to my grandmother's house, and Benjamin also stole thither from his master. My grandmother had gone to spend a day or two with an old friend living in the country. I have come, said Benjamin, to tell you goodbye. I am going away. I inquired where. To the north, he replied. I looked at him to see whether he was in earnest. I saw it all in his firm set mouth. I implored him not to go, but he paid no heed to my words. He said he was no longer a boy, and every day made his yoke more galling. He had raised his hand against his master, and he was to be publicly whipped for the offense. I reminded him of the poverty and hardship he must encounter among strangers. I told him he might be caught and brought back, and that was a terrible thing to think of. He grew vexed and asked if poverty and hardships with freedom were not preferable to our treatment in slavery. Linda, he continued, we are dogs here, footballs, cattle, everything that's mean. No, I will not stay. Let them bring me back. We don't die but once. He was right, but it was hard to give him up. Go, said I, and break your mother's heart. I repented of my words ere they were out my mouth. Linda, said he, speak as I had not heard him speaking that evening. How could you say that? Poor mother. Be kind to her, Linda, and you too, Cousin Fanny. Cousin Fanny was a friend who had lived some years with us. Farewells were exchanged, and the bright, kind boy, endeared to us by so many acts of love, vanished from our sight. It is not necessary to state how he made his escape. Suffice to say, he was on his way to New York when a violent storm overtook the vessel. The captain said he must be put into the nearest port. This alarmed Benjamin, who was aware that he would be advertised in every port near his own town. His embarrassment was noticed by the captain to port they went. There the advertiser met the captain's eye. Benjamin so exactly answered its description that the captain laid hold on him and bound him in chains. The storm passed and they proceeded to New York. Before reaching the port, Benjamin managed to get off his chains and throw them overboard. He escaped from the vessel but was pursued, captured, and carried back to his master. When my grandmother returned home and found her youngest child had fled, great was her sorrow. But with characteristic piety, she said, God's will be done. Each morning she inquired if any news had been heard from her boy. Yes, news was heard. The master was rejoicing over a letter announcing the capture of his human cattle. That day seems but as yesterday. So well do I remember it. I saw him led through the streets in chains to jail. So they captured him and brought him back. His face was ghastly pale, yet full of determination. He had begged one of the sailors to go to his mother's house and ask her not to meet him. He said the sight of her distress would take from him all self-control. She yearned to see him, and she went, but she screened herself in the crowd, that it might be as her child had said. We were not allowed to visit him, but we had known the jailer for years, and he was a kind-hearted man. At midnight, he opened the jail door for my grandmother and myself to enter in disguise. When we entered the cell, not a sound broke the stillness. Benjamin, Benjamin, whispered my grandmother. No answer. Benjamin, she again faltered. There was a jingle of chains. The moon had risen and cast an uncertain light through the bars of the window. We knelt down and took Benjamin's cold hands in ours. We did not speak. Sobs were heard and Benjamin's lips were unsealed, for his mother was weeping on his neck. How vividly does memory bring back that sad night. Mother and son talked together. He asked her pardon for suffering he had caused her. She said she had nothing to forgive. She could not blame his desire for freedom. He told her that when he was captured, he broke away and was about casting himself into the river when thoughts of her came over him and he desisted. She asked if he did not also think of God. I fancied I saw his face grew fierce in the moonlight. He answered, no, I did not think of him. When a man is hunted like a wild beast, he forgets there is a God, a heaven. He forgets everything in his struggle to get beyond the reach of the bloodhounds. Don't talk so, Benjamin, said she. Put your trust in God. Be humble, my child, and your master will forgive you. Forgive me for what, mother? For not letting him treat me like a dog? No, I will never humble myself to him. I would work for him for nothing all my life, and I am repaid with stripes and imprisonment. Here I will stay till I die or till he sells me. The poor mother shuddered at his words. I think he felt, for when he next spoke, his voice was calmer. Don't fret about me, mother. I ain't worth it, said he. I wish I had some of your goodness. You bear everything patiently, just as though you thought it was all right. I wish I could. She told him she had not always been so. Once she was like him, but when sore troubles came upon her and she had no arm to lean upon, she learned to call on God, and he lightened her burdens. She besought him to do likewise. We overstayed our time and were obliged to hurry from the jail. Benjamin had been in prison 3 weeks when my grandmother went to intercede for him with his master. He was immovable. He said Benjamin should serve as an example to the rest of his slaves. He should be kept in jail till he was subdued or be sold if he got but $1 for him. However, he afterwards relented in some degree. The chains were taken off and were allowed to visit him. As his food was of the coarsest kind, we carried him as often as possible a warm supper, accompanied with some little luxury for the jailer. 3 months elapsed, and there was no prospect of release or of purchaser. Benjamin was like, forget that. I'm not apologizing. One day he was heard to sing and laugh. The piece of indecorum was told to his master, and the overseer was ordered to rechain him. He was now confined in an apartment with other prisoners who were covered with filthy rags. Benjamin was chained near them, and was soon covered with vermin. He worked at his chains till he succeeded in getting out of them. He passed them through the bars of the window with a request that they should be taken to his master, and he should be informed that they were covered with vermin. This audacity was punished with heavier chains and prohibition of our visits. My grandmother continued to send him fresh changes of clothes. The old ones were burned. The last night we saw him in jail, his mother still begged him to send for his master and beg his pardon. Neither persuasion nor neither persuasion nor argument could turn him from his purpose. He calmly answered, "I'm waiting my time." Those chains were mournful to hear. Another 3 months passed, and Benjamin left his prison walls. We that loved him waited to bid him a long and last farewell. A slave trader bought him. You remember I told you what price he bought when he was 10 years old. Now he was more than 20 years old and sold for $300. The master had been blind to his own interests. Long confinement had made his face too pale, his form too thin. Moreover, the trader had heard something of his character, and it did not strike him as a suitable for a slave. He said he would give any price if the handsome lad was a girl. We thank God he was not. Could you have seen that mother clinging to her child when they fastened the irons upon his wrist? Could you have heard the heart-rending groans and seen her bloodshot eyes wandering wildly from face to face, vainly pleading for mercy? Could you have witnessed that scene as I saw it? You would exclaim, slavery is damnable. Benjamin, her youngest, her pet, was forever gone. She could not realize it. She had had an interview with the trader for the purpose of ascertaining if Benjamin could be purchased. She was told it was impossible, as he had given bonds not to sell him till he was out of the state. He promised that he would not sell him till he reached New Orleans. With a strong arm and an unvaried trust, my grandmother began her work of love. Benjamin must be free. If she succeeded, she knew she would still be separated, but the sacrifice was not too great. Day and night she labored. The trader's price would treble that he gave, but she was not discouraged. She employed a lawyer to write to a gentleman who she knew in New Orleans. She begged him to interest himself with Benjamin and willingly favored her request. When he saw Benjamin and stated his business, he thanked him, but said he preferred to wait a while before making the trader an offer. He knew he had tried to obtain a high price for him and had invariably failed. This encouraged him to make another effort for freedom. So one morning, long before day, Benjamin was missing. He was riding over the blue billows bound for Baltimore. For once, his white face did him a kindly service. They had no suspicion that it belonged to a slave. Otherwise, the law would have been followed out to the letter, and the thing rendered back to slavery. And that thing, as we know, they classified you as human chattel, so you would have been that thing. Or Benjamin is that thing. The brightest skies are often overshadowed by the darkest clouds. Benjamin was taken sick and compelled to remain in Baltimore 3 weeks. His strength was slow in returning, and his desire to continue his journey seemed to retard his recovery. How could he get strength without air and exercise? He resolved to venture on a short walk, and by street was selected where he thought himself secure of not being met by anyone that knew him. But a voice called out, "Hello, Ben, my boy. What are you doing here?" His first impulse was to run, but his legs trembled so that he could not stir. He turned to confront his antagonist, and behold, there stood his old master's next door neighbor. He thought it was all over with him now, but it proved otherwise. That man was a miracle. He possessed a goodly number of slaves, and yet was not quite deaf to the mystic clock whose ticking is rarely heard in the slaveholder's breast. And as we know, that's an allusion or alluding to the fact that this dude has some level of a heart, which many do not. Ben, you are sick, said he. Why, you look like a ghost. I guess I gave you something of a start. Never mind, Ben. I'm not going to touch you. You had a pretty tough time of it, and you may go on your way rejoicing for all me. But I would advise you to get out of this place quickly, for there are several gentlemen here from our town. He described the nearest and safest route to New York and added, I shall be glad to tell your mother I have seen you. Goodbye, Ben. So the European next door neighbor slaveholder saw Ben, and instead of taking him back to his master, he told him get out of Dodge or Baltimore and told him how to get to New York quickly. Benjamin turned away filled with gratitude and surprise that the town he hated contained such a gem worthy of purer setting. This gentleman was a northerner by birth and had married a southern lady. On his return, he told my grandmother that he had seen her son and of the service he had rendered him. Benjamin reached New York safely and concluded to stop there until he had gained strength enough to proceed further. It happened that my grandmother's only remaining son had sailed for the same city on business for his mistress. Through God's providence, the brothers met. So Ben meets his older brother Phil in New York. You may be sure it was a happy meeting. Oh, Phil, exclaimed Benjamin, I am here at last. Then he told him how near he came to dying, almost in sight of free land, and how he prayed that he might live to get one breath of free air. He said life was worth something now, and it would be hard to die. In the old jail, he had not valued it. Once he was tempted to destroy it, but something he did not know what had prevented him. Perhaps it was fear. He had heard those who profess to be religious declare that there was no heaven for self-murderers. And as his life had been pretty hot here, he did not desire a continuation of the same in another world. If I die now, he exclaimed, thank God I shall die a free man. He begged my Uncle Phil not to return to the South, but stay and work with him till they earned enough to buy those at home. His brother told him it would kill their mother if he deserted her in her trouble. She had pledged her house and with difficulty had raised money to buy him. Would he be bought? No, never, he replied. Do you suppose, Phil, when I have got so far out of their clutches, I will give them 1 red cent? No. And do you suppose I would turn mother out of her home in her old age, that I would let her pay all her hard-earned dollars for me and never see me? For you know she will stay South as long as her other children are slaves. What a good mother. Tell her to buy you, Phil. You have been a comfort to her, and I have been trouble. And Linda, poor Linda, what will become of her? Phil, you don't know what a life they lead here. She has told me something about it, and I wish old Flint was dead or a better man. When I was in jail, he asked her if she didn't want him to ask my master to forgive me and take me home again. She told him no, that I didn't want to go back. He got mad and said we were all alike. I never despised my own master half as much as I do that man. There's many a worse slaveholder than my master, but for all that I would not be his slave. While Benjamin was sick, he had parted with nearly all his clothes to pay necessary expenses, but he did not part with a little pin I fastened in his bosom when we parted. It was the most valuable thing I owned, and I thought none more worthy to wear it. He had it still. His brother furnished, that's the train passing, so it's all good. Where am I? His brother furnished him with clothes and gave him what money he had. They parted with moistened eyes, meaning they was crying. And as Benjamin turned away, he said, Phil, I part with all my kindred. And so it proved. We never heard from him again. Uncle Philip came home, and the first words he uttered when he entered the house was, Mother, Ben is free. I have seen him in New York. She stood looking at him with a bewildered air. Mother, don't you believe it? He said, laying his hand softly upon her shoulder. She raised her hands and exclaimed, God be praised. Let us thank him. She dropped on her knees, poured forth her heart in prayer. Then Philip must sit down and repeat to her every word Benjamin had said. He told her all, only he forbade to mention how sick and pale her darling looked. Why should he distress her when she could do him no good? The brave old woman still toiled on, hoping to rescue some of her other children. After a while, she succeeded in buying Philip. She paid $800 and came home with the precious document that secured his freedom. The happy mother and son sat together by the old hearthstone that night, telling how proud they were of each other and how they would prove to the world that they could take care of themselves as they had long taken care of others. We all concluded by saying, he that is willing to be a slave, let him be a slave. And that is some hakma right there. That's the ending of chapter 4. It got turned up. Benjamin done ran away. He's free in New York. And the grandmother bought her son. Benjamin told her, buy Phil. So she buys Phil. And it ends with, we all concluded by saying, he that is willing to be a slave, let him be a slave, meaning they wasn't willing. So we're going to go on to chapter 5. We're going to read chapter 5 as well. It's not a long chapter. So let's go. The trials of girlhood. During the first years of my service in Dr. Flint's family, I was accustomed to share some indulgences with the children of my mistress. Though this seemed to me no more than right, I was grateful for it and tried to merit the kindness by faithful discharge of my duties. But I now entered on my 15th year. Now she's past going into puberty, 15 years old, a sad epoch in the life of a slave girl. My master began to whisper foul words in my ear. Young as I was, I could not remain ignorant of their import. I tried to treat them with indifference or contempt. The master's age, my extreme youth, and the fear that his conduct would be reported to my grandmother made him bear his treatment for many months. He was a crafty man and resorted to many means to accomplish his purposes. Sometimes he had stormy, terrific ways that made his victim tremble. Sometimes he assumed a gentleness that he thought was more surely subdued. One of the two I preferred his stormy moods, although they left me trembling. He tried his utmost to corrupt the pure principles my grandmother had instilled. He peopled my young mind with unclean images, such as only a vile monster could think of. I turned from him with disgust and hatred. But he was my master. I was compelled to live under the same roof with him, where I saw a man 40 years my senior daily violating the more sacred commandments of nature. He told me I was his property, that I must be subject to his will in all things. My soul revolted against the mean tyranny, but where could I turn for protection? No matter where the slave girl be, as black as ebony, or as fair as her mistress. In either case, there is no shadow of law to protect her from insult, from violence, or even from death. All these are inflicted by fiends who bear the shape of men. The mistress who ought to protect the helpless victim has no other feelings towards her but of those of jealousy and rage. The degradation, the wrongs, the vices that grow out of slavery are more than I can describe. They are greater than you would willingly believe. Surely, if you credited one half the truths that are told you concerning the helpless millions suffering in this cruel bondage, you at the north would not help to tighten the yoke. You surely will refuse to do for the master on your own soil the mean and cruel work which trained bloodhounds and the lowest class of whites do for him at the South, meaning the Negro catchers and the patty rollers who come rolling up on you to bring you back into slavery. Everywhere the year brings to all enough of sin and sorrow, but in slavery, the very dawn of life is darkened by these shadows. Even the little children who is accustomed to wait on her mistress and her children will learn before she is 12 years old why it is that her mistress hates such and such a one among the slaves. Perhaps the child's own mother is among those hated ones. She listens to violent outbreaks of jealous passion and cannot help understand what is the cause. She will become prematurely knowing in evil things. Soon she will learn to tremble when she hears her master's footfall. She will be compelled to realize that she is no longer a child. If God had bestowed beauty upon her, it will prove her greatest curse, because they're going to try to get at you even worse. That which commands admiration in the white woman's, wait, let me read that again and slowly. That which commands admiration in the white woman only hastens the degradation of the female slave. I know that some are too much brutalized by slavery to feel the humiliation of their position, but many slaves feel it most acutely and shrink from the memory of it. I cannot tell how much I have suffered in the presence of these wrongs, nor how I am still pained by the retrospect. My master met me at every turn, reminding me that I belong to him and swearing by heaven and earth that he will compel me to submit to him. If I went out for a breath of fresh air after a day of unwearied toil, his footsteps dogged me. If I knelt by my brother's grave, his dark shadow fell on me even there. The light heart which nature had given me became heavy with sad forbearance, sexual harassment. Dude was like thirsty. The other slaves in my master's house noticed the change. Many of them pitied me, but none dared to ask the cause. They had no need to inquire. They knew too well the guilty practices under that roof, and they were aware that to speak of them was an offense that never went unpunished. And that's not the first time I hear that if they speak of being abused, they get more abuse. I long for someone to confide in. I would have given the world to have laid my head on my grandmother's faithful bosom and told her all my troubles. But Dr. Flint swore he would kill me if I was not as silent as the grave. Then, although my grandmother was all in all to me, I feared her as well as loved her. I had been accustomed to look up to her with a respect bordering upon awe. I was very young and felt shamefaced about telling her such impure things, especially as I knew her to be a strict on such subjects. Moreover, she was a woman of high spirit. She was usually very quiet in her demeanor, but if her indignation was once aroused, it was not very easily quelled. I had been told that she once chased a white gentleman with a loaded pistol because he insulted one of her daughters. I dreaded the consequences of a violent outbreak, and both pride and fear kept me silent. But though I did not confide in my grandmother and even evaded her vigilant watchfulness and inquiry, her presence in the neighborhood was some protection to me. Though she had been a slave, Dr. Flint was afraid of her. He dreaded her scorching rebukes. Moreover, she was known and patronized by many people, and he did not wish to have his villainy made public. It was lucky for me that I did not live on a distant plantation, but in a town not so large that the inhabitants were ignorant of each other's affairs. Bad as are the laws and customs in a slaveholding community, the doctor, as a professional man, deemed it prudent to keep up some outward show of decency. For those who have just joined us, we are on, I have like a few more paragraphs. We're almost finished chapter 5. And this is very interesting. She's saying that if she lived in another place, it would have been a done deal. But because this dude is supposed to be a doctor and he got to keep up appearances, this is what's kind of saving her from being violated, although he's still violating her on another level. Oh, what days and nights of fear and sorrow that man caused me. Reader, it is not to awaken sympathy for myself that I am telling you truthfully what I suffered in slavery. I do it to kindle a flame of compassion in your hearts for my sisters who are still in bondage, suffering as I once were. And for those who missed the very, very beginning, at this point, this book is written in 1861. She's writing to the abolitionists in the North, and she's trying to tell them about the situation that that when she says reader, we the reader too, but she was initially addressing it to abolitionists who are against slavery. She says, I once saw two beautiful children playing together. One was a fair white child, The other was her slave and also her sister. When I saw them embracing each other and heard their joyous laughter, I turned sadly away from the lovely sight. I foresaw the inevitable blight that would fall on the little slave's heart. I knew how soon her laughter would be changed into sighs. The fair child grew up to be a still fairer woman. From childhood to womanhood, her pathway was blooming with flowers and overarching by a sunny sky. Scarcely one day of her life had been clouded with the sun rose on her happy bridal morning. How had those years dealt with her slave sister, the little playmate of her childhood? She also was very beautiful, but the flowers and sunshine of her love were not for her. She drank the cup of sin and the shame and misery whereof her persecuted race are compelled to drink. Last paragraph, I mean. In view of these things, why are you silent, ye free men and women of the North? Why do your tongues falter in maintenance of the right? Would that I have more ability, but my heart is so full and my pen is so weak. There are noble men and women who plead for us, striving to help those who cannot help themselves. God bless them. God give them strength and courage to go on. God bless those everywhere who are laboring to advance the cause of humanity. And that's the end of the reading of chapter 4 and 5. It's about to get turned up in chapter 6, the jealous mistress. So make sure you join us for the next reading to find out what's going on with this nasty old man, Dr. Flint, who is trying to hit on the 15-year-old, but she already resolved in her mind that she will not be conquered. And so the story gets more and more interesting. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Wait a minute. I think somebody hit us up on social media. Let me check a look here. If you have any feedback, feel free to let me know. I'll read it and we can have a discussion. I see here, Benjamin was determined to be free. His spirit could not be chained. What a strong mother they had. You had to work hard for $800. Exactly. You had to work very hard for $800 in 1860s. That's not like today where that's a 2-week check. She was making a lot of cookies. It says the master was like a little nasty, dirty dog sniffing a big soup bone, trying to get after young Linda. That's very true. He was nasty. He was very slimy. But he wasn't one that was trying to force it. He was trying to get her to subdue. So our foremothers, in this particular case, she's saying that if you were beautiful, it was like a curse, because not only the slave master, also it would be the overseer and the slave master's children. They would try to violate you in some way. So it was a serious thing for a young girl, especially coming of age at that time and space. It really wasn't safe. And she's telling us about her struggles, and it gets very interesting as it goes on. So like I said, thank you for the comment and the feedback. I see a little more coming through here. If you do, I'm Emuna Yisrael on social media. Also, you can put it on the box on the side. Let me see here. If you have anything to say, I know sometimes people tell me after. So what I'll start doing, if you tell me after, then I'll just read it when we enter into the next one if I don't see it while this is still live. So I'm going to wait a little bit. And it's hard to imagine, but this was the life, like she said, she had to deal with the jealous mistress, and you're stuck in the middle because you're working. Sometimes, we get a narrative that, the field Negro had it worse than the house Negro. But in this case, if you were the house Negro and you were a woman in the house, one would beg to differ, because she had a whole other set of things of which she had to deal with. So definitely, I don't see any more comments coming through. So we're gonna reconvene. Like I said, the story's getting juicy, so definitely stay tuned. And thank everybody for joining us. Sorry for the little mix-up. So if you missed the beginning, you got to skip like at least 12-15 minutes, because I was reading to myself on mute at that point, which I didn't know. So I just went and read the story all over again, because you might have missed something. I know I did. So until next time, my name is Emuna Yisrael. This is the Lev Project, and join us for part 4 of Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Everybody have a blessed night. Shalom.